Hey everybody, Bryce here, and today we are turning it up a notch, but before we do that, I just want to apologize. It's been a very long time since I posted a new video. I've been super busy with work, traveling, and I've also released 2 Angular courses for 2 different companies. So it's been a super busy couple months, but now I got some free time, so getting back into it. So please share the videos, like and subscribe if you find them helpful. It helps other people find the videos. So today, what we're going to get into is we've been doing a lot of React videos. Well, I've done a couple of React videos in the past, but people want to see more advanced React. People are tired of the simple to-do apps and whatnot, and I get it. So we're going to turn it up a notch, but we're doing an incrementer app. Basically a counter that you can push like one of 2 buttons. You can increment or decrement a counter, which sounds really simple, and everybody's probably over it because they've seen it done in React or whatever, Angular a million times. But we're going to do it a little differently because we're going to use Redux. So it's a super simple application, but we're going to go through Redux, which I'm sure some of you have been interested in learning. And if you're not familiar with Redux, essentially what Redux does for you is it maintains a data store for your application. So it maintains state of your application. And from any component in your application, you can access that data store and change its state. So let's say you want to log in the user, you could dispatch that action, say login user. That'll trigger some API call that comes back with some data. You can save it to the store and then have it show up in real time on the user interface. So in this case, what we're going to do is we have a counter. We're going to increment or decrement based on an increment or decrement button. And it'll show a number in the middle. It's going to start with 0. As we press increment, it'll go up and increase, but it's going to flow through our proper routes. So what we're going to have happen is we'll have an action called increment. So when we click on the increment button, we'll dispatch that action, which will flow to a reducer. The reducer will listen for that action. When it sees that action, then it'll change the state of the application. It'll update the store, and the Redux store is where all the data is stored. And then that'll come back as props, which are passed through from a container component to our actual presentational component. So that sounds super complicated, but trust me, it's not too bad. So we'll get into it here. So if you don't have Create React app installed, go ahead and install it now. So if you have npm, should have npm installed. If not, you can check out some of my other videos and see how I set up. So we'll go npm install -g. We'll say Create React app. So this is just kind of a scaffolding application. Let's put out. So yours may take a little longer. I already had it installed, so it's pretty quick. And let me make this a little bigger so you guys can see this. And now we'll go Create React app, and we'll call it counter app. Sounds good. So that might take a second to scaffold here. So while this is installing, so the reason you'd use something like Redux, or you may have seen the word flow, or excuse me, flux. Flow is something different. That's for type safety. But Flux is what Facebook came out as kind of a way to manage state throughout your application. So in bigger React applications, React isn't a great way to manage all these different things that are happening in your application. They're great for creating these like small presentational components or visuals, and having them update, based on certain state or whatever, but they're not good at managing the state. So that's why we need a separate library here. So now this is installed. You can see the instructions. It says cd counter app. So we'll change directory. And then we can run yarn start. Now I'll start our dev server. Let me bring this back in here. so you can see it. Cool. So this is what you get out of the box. Nothing too crazy, but we'll go ahead and just clean up some things. You see it says localhost. Cool. So let me kill that. And I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. You can install it by going and Googling for Visual Studio Code. Actually, I'm going to leave here. I'll just do it from here. Got to kind of hover over it to get it right there. So change it to terminal. Oops, it's kind of big. And from here we can say yarn start. So that'll watch for code changes. So no big deal there. And you should be able to open that back up and see it. Cool. So I'm just going to close that out for now. And I'm going to hide that from the sidebar. So now we just have our application. We have source. So now if we go into, let's go into app.js, do some cleanup there. Oh, actually, before we do anything else, from your terminal, you can do it in either or. You can do it from the terminal down here if you want. I'm just going to do it in the other one so it's a little easier to see. And so we need to install some packages. So we can say yarn add Redux. So you can use Redux with Angular, Vue. It's not actually just for React. And then we also need the React package. So it's React Redux. So that's the React wrapper to connect to Redux. And if you're not familiar with yarn, it's just a replacement for npm. It's no biggie. You can do the same npm install -- save is the same as yarn add. Cool. So install those two dependencies. Now we go back over to our application. Make this a little smaller here. Close this out. And you see we just got this basic application for right now. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the logo. We don't need it. Say welcome to, let's just call it a simple counter. Get rid of this logo. So we have that header, a title, and we have this little app intro. I don't think we need that. We'll save that. Delete that logo file as well. Cool. So now it just says simple counter. I'm going to clean up some of the styles real quick. So you don't need app logo, app intro, or the keyframes to make the logo spin. Don't need any of that. Instead of 150, let's make the height 50 pixels, 20 white, and for our content we'll throw in there. Cool, so it just says simple counter. Not bad. And background color, I'll just make this something a little prettier here. It's called slate gray. Cool. All right, so we're doing all right now. We got our app set up. So now a couple things we need to do to set up. Let's go to index.js. And in here, I'm going to say import provider from React Redux. And so provider is something we can wrap around our application here. So we have this render. Oops. Put that down there. Actually, I'll put it right here. There we go. And so we have our application, but we need to provide the store to it. And so in functional programming, you basically pass functions to functions. And so each one of these elements or JSX elements, they look like an HTML tag, but really they're just functions. So what we can do here is we can go provider, and it takes a prop called store, and we'll pass it our store, which we haven't created yet, but I'll show you how we do that. All right, cut that. And that looks good. So now what we need to do, come up here, say import store from store. Oop. And so what you can see is happening here is basically bringing this Redux store, gets passed in here as a prop to this provider, which is coming from React Redux. And that's going to connect our data store to our React application by wrapping our application here. So let's create a new file here. Call it store.js. And for the store, I'm going to do a couple things here. Let's import create store, apply middleware, and compose from Redux. And we'll import, probably want a logger here. So we'll need to add this too from Redux logger. So let's add that before I forget. So this will be just kind of a handy little package for you. It'll just log all your Redux actions. So we'll add that now. And you can do the same with the npm install -- save Redux logger. And don't worry, that's not working right now. We know that. We broke some things. And so to enable logging, I'm just going to put const logger equals create logger. And I'm going to pass a property here, collapsed. These are just things you got to pass it. Don't worry about that. Log entry dot, oops, error. So all that's doing is instantiating, basically we're creating a logger from create logger, which is coming from Redux logger. And this is, you really don't need this, is all kind of optional, but it just automatically collapses the entries. Otherwise it kind of gets blown up in your console log. Down here we'll say const middleware equals apply middleware. And we're just going to pass our logger. So it'll get passed into this middleware, and the middleware then will get passed into our store. So as everything flows through, so as our actions get dispatched, like we say increment, will flow through, passes through this middleware. So it'll get logged as it passes through. And we'll say equals create store based on that function we have from Redux. And here we're going to pass it our reducers, which we don't have yet. So we'll create that next. And we'll say compose middleware. And I'm also going to add in dev tools extension. Window.dev tools extension. So this is another way to debug your Redux actions and see what's firing in your application. So this is kind of just boilerplate, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. So, and then finally we got export default the store. So that way we can bring it into our app.js, or excuse me, our index.js that we just did. So this is all of the store information we need. So we just created a logger, we pass it into this apply middleware function, and then your create store expects to get reducers and then basically the middleware, but we actually need to apply an extra middleware with the dev tools and everything. So I'm going to use this function called compose, which will just take multiple middlewares here and put them together. I'll show you dev tools extension. It's on the Chrome store. So we go here and just add it to Chrome. I already have it installed, but it's pretty cool. You can do some pretty advanced stuff and see how the data is flowing through your application and replay it, skip. Really awesome. And so you notice these reducers here. And so in our data store, we have these things called reducers. And what the reducers do is they look for any actions that have been dispatched. So if we say increment the counter is our action, the reducers basically listen for that action. And so only one of them is listening for that particular action. But you may have multiple reducers listening for, like, is user logged in? User login success, user login failure, and then are triggering notifications. There's all kinds of things you could be doing. So in source, let's create a couple of folders here. And let's say components. New folder. Could put these all in one, just the root directory there, but just so you can kind of see a structure of what an actual application could look like. Reducers, if it was like a little bit larger scale. So we have these now, and so in here, I'm just gonna make a new file. I'll say counter.js, and let's see, what do I want to do from here? Where are we getting these reducers from? I think I missed something here. Need to import these. Oh, from reducers. Let's see. That's what we're missing. Need to import reducers from /reducers. So let's create a new file here. Called reducers.js. And in there, we basically want to grab all the reducers we have in this folder here. Right now we only have one. Let's say combine reducers is a function we'll need from Redux. It's a nice little built-in. And then I'm just going to import, say, counter from, we don't have anything there yet. Say reducers/counter. And we'll export default combine reducers. And this is where you would list all your reducers. And so actually go like this. And so it's a counter, comma, the next reducer. Make sure you import them all from the folder. And that way they all get basically sent to Redux, to the store file here. All the reducers come in, they all get combined reducers, combines all them together, and so then any actions that pass through get dispatched. Reducers catch them, do whatever they need to do to change the state, and then alert the store to let it know. So what are we on to now? Reducers, we have the counter. So let's do that. That sounds good. So we come in here, I'll say import. Actually, you know what I need? I need actions. So in a large file, you usually have an actions file or multiple kind of actions files. And there's not much to these. It's just kind of setting constants. So we make sure we use it the same way. We're not trying to spell it out every time. So increment. And then we'll also do decrement. So now whenever we need to reference these strings, we'll do basically reference this variable. That way we don't get any typos, we get auto completion, and everything works really nicely. So if we go back to our reducer, counter.js, so we're going to import those two constants so we can use them. So this probably seems pretty confusing right now, I imagine. And you're like, but React is really simple. Well, yeah, React is really simple, but then when you start building more robust applications, there's a lot of boilerplate you got to kind of add to make it work. So it doesn't seem worthwhile for a counter app. You could probably just do it in React. But if you had like a large scale application where a component 6 levels down needed to trigger some action up above in the state, then it makes sense. But we're just doing this just to show how we could do this. So we need to create an initial state here. And I'll set the count to 0. So that's our initial state of our counter. And we'll just say export default state, and we'll go to default initialization. So we'll say initial state and then action. So this is basically how all your reducers are going to be set up in this type of fashion. So it's going to take the previous state, which we initialize it because the first time it's not going to have one, and then you have an action coming in. And then we're going to have a switch case here. And we'll say action.type. And in the case of that action, the type is increment. So we get that auto completion there. What we want to do in this case, we want to return. Basically, we want to return what the new state is, because we're basically going to replace the whole state. We're not just changing like little properties and stuff. The whole state gets updated at once. So it's really nice because you can replay the state and go back to the entire state of your application is maintained in every step of the way. And so here we're going to use some fancy ES6, the spread operator. So all our previous state, which the first time it comes through, it's just going to be count 0. But you can imagine you could have other properties here, but this is the only one we're going to have. And so it copies all the state, all the other properties, and then you override whatever it is you want to override. And you can do other, call other functions here to do more complicated stuff. This is a really simple application, so there's not much to do. And then we'll override the one field we need to override. And you could override multiple fields. This is just for an example. Count, and we'll say count plus 1. You don't want to go like this, because now you're actually modifying this state object. We want to return it as a new, basically, object here for count. And then we'll say case decrement. Let's make sure, put a break statement in there. So then we get decrement. Oops. Let's say return. We'll say state count state.count -1. So we do the same thing as above, creating a new state. We'll say break case default. So default case, we'll just return the state. Seemed like that. Let's see. Oh, there we go. This is not case, it's just default. So otherwise, and you make sure to have this default case, because in the case where it doesn't match any of these, it needs to return the default state. So when you have multiple reducers, so you may have one for counter, we may have one for authentication, may have all kinds of reducers. You could have 30 or 40 reducers in an application. Basically, when it dispatches this action, they're all going to be running through their switch case, and if nothing is there, they just return the default state. So you need to have this default state there. Great. So that looks good. So in the case where it's increment, we basically return the state. We create a new object to return to replace the entire state. We override or replace, excuse me, basically pass all the original state values and then just override what we need. So we just need to override count, even though count's the only thing. We could have other things in there. That's all we have. Great. And so we probably need, so our application looks like it's working okay. Nothing to it though right now. And so let's create a component here. And we'll call it counter.js. create a CSS file to go along with it. And in our component, we'll say, oops, import React from React. Then we'll import our counter.css file. And then we're just going to export const counter. Oops. Here's the tricky part. Put parentheses. So basically we're tricking JavaScript into thinking this like a one-line return. By wrapping in parentheses, we're just saying all this stuff is getting returned here. So that caught me a few times when I was first doing React. I would put curly braces and have some issues. So what we're going to do, this is just a presentational component. And so it's basically just a function returning. So we can create a div here. We'll say span.count. And here we're going to pass props.counter.count. We'll put a BR tag in there, and then we'll have our two buttons. So let's say button.btn and put increment, and we'll say on click. When I click this button, we put the curly braces there because there's going to be some JavaScript that gets executed. So we put a function in there. We'll say props.increment. It'll be a function we're going to call. And let me just close this for now so you can see what's going on. Copy that. Oops. Make this one decrement. Decrement. There we go. Perfect. And we'll open up counter.css. And I just hit Command P to open that up. And in here, I'm just going to add some quick styling. This is optional. Just make our buttons look a little bit better. Not much, but make the text white. Give them a little border radius. Say margin 1 EM, border none, outline none. Make our buttons look good, and then for the count, I want to make it look big, so we'll say font size 2 EM, font weight, we'll say 800, make it heavy, and we'll also make it 555. Cool. So moving back up our side panel here. So let's say if we went to app.js and after the header include, we'll say it's not even going to work. I'm not even going to bother rendering the component by itself because we're going to have issues. It's probably what you saw here. So we have a purely presentational component. And basically we need to pass a property to it that is the counter. So it's the counter reducer that we're basically getting the count from. And also in the props, we're expecting to get increment property and a decrement, an increment function and a decrement function, which we can call, via these buttons. So normally you'd have to pass this function down through the props manually, but what if this component's nested like 6 layers deep in your application? You don't have to pass it through all the other components, so now they all have a dependency of having that property. So it gets really messy. So what we can do here is we now have this concept of containers. So let's create a new file here, and I'll call it enhanced counter.js. And so what we're going to do is we're going to basically wrap this component with data from the store. So let me minimize this here and start here by importing this function connect from React Redux and import counter from components / counter. So is the counter component we just created. And now we need two different functions here. And so these are Redux functions. Well, you can call them whatever you want, but this is most commonly what they're called. So one's called map dispatch to props. The other one's called map state to props. And so dispatches are typically your actions you want to dispatch. So these are going to be increment and decrement. And map state to props is going to be the counter or whatever you want. So basically the state is getting passed in from the store. So from here, what do we want to do? Say dispatch, and we'll return. We want two functions called increment. And here, when increment gets called, so that was the on-click increment button, what happens is it's going to call this that gets passed in, called dispatch. And we're just going to say type increment. So nothing crazy there. And decrement's pretty similar. Oh, I don't want to put that. Almost caught me there, because that would have failed because everything else was in. If we look at our actions, see they're all capitalized. So that would have messed us up there. So let me import. Get those from actions. There we go. And type here will be decrement. Should put curly braces there. Perfect. Now we need another called map state to props. And this will take in the state. You'll see how these get those properties here. And here we want to return, basically say counter, and we'll say state.counter. So this is nice, you can name them whatever you want. I usually try to name them kind of whatever reducer they're coming from. But you could change it if you needed to for whatever reason. Perfect. And then finally we'll go export default and we'll say connect. Connect map state to props. You must pass them in this order, otherwise you're gonna have a bad time. Map dispatch to props. And it's a higher order component, so basically we want to wire all this up and we need to apply it or wrap it to our component. So we'll apply it to the counter component. So this is a pretty new concept probably for most people if you've never seen Redux or anything like this before. So this is kind of some functional programming here where you basically have a function being passed to a function. But essentially we're now wrapping counter with all of this. So this returns a function that'll then call this here. So a little crazy looking, but trust me, if you follow this pattern here, connect, map state to props, map dispatch to props, and dispatch being your functions you call, and state being the global state of your application. So you can have the counter is user logged in, so we could have an auth where it has like a subproperty is user logged in, etc. This would be perfect. So now that is wired up. So now if we go back to our app.js, and it looks like I missed something here. There we go. And so in here, now we can import enhanced counter dot slash containers slash enhance counter. And we'll render that here. Did I add it? Yep. Cool. Does it work? It does. So what we have here, we have the counter. This is our presentational component here. So this is basically this entire portion right here. This is everything. This is coming from our app.js, the top header bar. So you could have your entire application in here. We have our two buttons. They're calling these two functions from the props that are getting passed in. And how do the props get passed in? Well, we basically decorate in our enhanced counter, which is a container or higher order component, as you hear them called. We're basically mapping the state of the application to this component here via this container. And then we're also allowing or exposing these two functions here to the props to the counter. So hopefully that makes sense what we're doing. Another thing to check out. So if you have Redux DevTools installed, let's open up to the right here. Oops. Make it big so you guys can kind of see. So you can see everything initializes. You can see the state. Count went from 0 to 1. Then it went from 1 to 0 because we decremented. And so it's pretty neat. You can see that we could skip this. And so if we skip that, now it goes 1 to 2. Instead of, if I jump that, you can see how it changes. So it's pretty interesting how you can see the state changing and it going through at different times, different seconds, and you can replay basically everything. Really fascinating. So we can look at our state, come back here. We can look at everything here. But there's lots of cool stuff you can do here. It's just kind of an inspector. But another thing we can do was, well, let me show you actually in our store. So this window DevTools portion, that's the portion, this is window DevTools here, which we got from the Chrome store. But you're probably wondering about this logger we created. So we go back over here and we inspect. We go to console. And you can see we have increment, increment, decrement. Let me refresh this here. Oh, unreachable code in source reducers counter.js. Where's that at? Line 11, counter.js. Let me fix that real quick. Oh, reducers, excuse me. Line 11 and line 14. Oh, the break statements. So it doesn't like those. Yep. So we're basically returning already. Yep, so it still works. Perfect. So we cleared that up. So you can see we're dispatching the action. You can click on it. You can see the previous state. The counter was set to 0. Then the action got dispatched to increment. And so the next state it became was 1. And so that's really handy for debugging. If you want to see it here where it's convenient, or you can go into here, which you could open inside of here if you wanted to. I think I have a tab for it. Yeah, Redux. Yeah, so you can do either or, whichever you prefer. Or do both, whatever. But I found it super handy. Go back to console. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, so this is really handy to see how the count changes, decrements. But you can see in a complicated app where you need to check if the user's logged in and other stuff's happening all at the same time, you can kind of isolate these different portions of the state within your giant global state store. Meanwhile, click up and down, increment and decrement. So not the world's most exciting application, but you can see all the work that goes into kind of setting this up properly. We have your higher order components that wrap your actual components that are for presentational only. And these ones is where you would handle all the kind of, not necessarily API calls. That's another future thing we'll get into. A lot of people ask about, like, how do I call an API? I have this weather API and I want to allow the user to type in a search box. Well, in order to do that, we need to introduce another concept because all of this is synchronous operations. So stuff that causes effects or side effects, such as calling an API, you have to wait. That's an asynchronous action. So we'll have to use a library called Thunk or Sagas. So I'll probably make a future video doing that. So stay tuned. Let me know if you like the video, if there's anything you get stuck on. Please like, subscribe, and share. It helps people find the videos who are learning. Really appreciate you guys sticking around and supporting the channel. And things are going well. We got over 700 subscribers now. I believe we hit over 900 likes the other day. 252,000 minutes of watch time. It's like over 4,000 hours of watch time. So you guys are awesome. Keep on learning, and let me know what else you guys want to see. Take care.